Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. Putin says the war in Ukraine is coming to an end, but on the ground, Ukrainian forces are actually gaining territory. So which version is real? Defense correspondent Marcus Webb is following this. Marcus, walk us through what Putin's actually claiming here.
Yeah, Emma. And look, the timing matters. He said this Saturday during Victory Day ceremonies on Red Square, so there's clearly a domestic political message happening. But what's significant is he's now explicitly saying the conflict is heading toward conclusion. He's blaming the West for prolonging it, says Western elites are arming Ukraine to break up Russia. That's the framing.
But Ukrainian troops are actually pushing forward right now. How does that square with his narrative?
That's the contradiction. And frankly, Emma, it's a big one. Ukrainian battlefield gains over the past few months directly contradict what Moscow is saying about momentum. What I'm hearing from defense analysts is this. Putin may believe Western support will eventually collapse, or he's trying to create political pressure for negotiations. But the ground reality doesn't support his coming to an end claim. That's a mismatch.
Marcus, appreciate it. Also on the world front, Trump scored a win on nuclear weapons, but it's in Venezuela, not Iran. And meanwhile, the Persian Gulf is still burning. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari joins us now. Layla, the uranium grab sounds big. Is it?
Yeah, Emma, it's tactically significant, but strategically it's almost beside the point. Look, the administration extracted 13.5 kilograms from Caracas on Friday. That's real. That's something to publicize. But Iran's sitting on 408 kilograms of enriched uranium. We're talking 30 times that amount. And what's actually destabilizing the Persian Gulf right now isn't nuclear material locked in reactors. It's Iranian military operations. It's tanker seizures in the Gulf of Oman. It's the threat to shipping lanes. I was speaking to a diplomat this morning who described the Venezuelan operation as a sideshow, his word, while the main event deteriorates.
So what's actually happening in the Persian Gulf right now?
The ceasefire, if we can even call it that, is fragile. Iran's been seizing vessels, including ones carrying what it claims is its own oil, caught in shadow fleet operations. The Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure. Energy markets are climbing, and frankly, Emma, the Trump administration's sending mixed signals. The president says the ceasefire is intact. Secretary Rubio's saying they're waiting for an Iranian response. Those aren't the same thing. If that response comes wrong, if Iran escalates, we could see this spiral very quickly.
So the uranium seizure in Venezuela, that's buying time?
That's my read, yeah. It's a way to show strength, to demonstrate resolve, to tell Tehran we're decisive and we act. But it doesn't resolve the core problem, which is that the Persian Gulf conflict isn't about uranium in storage facilities. It's about control of shipping, regional power, and how much access Iran gets to global markets under sanctions. The window for de-escalation is still there, but it's narrowing.
Layla Nazari, thank you. Remaining with world affairs, a cargo ship's on fire in the Persian Gulf tonight after taking a drone strike, and it's happening right in the middle of peace talks. Layla, you are still here. What are we learning about who fired that shot?
Yeah, Emma. And here's what makes this tricky. Qatar says it was a drone. The British military confirms the strike, but nobody's actually claiming responsibility, which is the pattern we've been seeing all week. I was speaking to a source in Doha this morning who said the real question isn't who fired it. It's whether it's meant to sabotage the ceasefire or test it. And frankly, those are two very different things.
So who benefits from an attack right now?
Well, that's the calculation everyone's making. If Iran's serious about these negotiations, they have every reason to keep proxies on a short leash. But non-state actors, as hardliners, they don't necessarily want a deal. They want escalation. And Iran's historically maintained enough distance from these groups to deny involvement. What's striking this time is the timing. It's almost like someone's testing whether the ceasefire holds or whether it breaks.
If it breaks, what happens?
Emma, if attacks keep coming, you're looking at the whole diplomatic framework collapsing. Shipping companies stop using the route, insurance costs spike, energy prices follow. This isn't just about one cargo ship. It's about whether 10 weeks of fighting end or whether we're looking at another round entirely.
Layla, thanks. Also on the world front, the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is unraveling fast. At least 39 people killed in fresh Israeli strikes across Lebanon on Saturday. Marcus rejoins me now. Marcus, this deal was supposed to hold. What's actually happening on the ground?
Yeah, Emma. And this is significant because the ceasefire was only 3 weeks old. We're not talking about old tensions resurfacing. These are fresh violations happening right now. What I'm hearing from sources tracking the situation is that Israel's expanded its target zones beyond Hezbollah's traditional southern strongholds. They're hitting infrastructure near Beirut, highways, civilian areas. That's a tactical shift. And frankly, it suggests this ceasefire was always fragile.
So why would Israel break a deal it just signed?
Look, the stated reason is security. Israeli officials say they're responding to threats, defending against Hezbollah positions. But here's what's telling. The scale of Saturday's strikes, the breadth of the targets, this doesn't look like reactive defense. This looks deliberate. And when Hezbollah responded with drone strikes on northern Israel, you've got the cycle spinning again. That's the real problem, Emma. Neither side's backing down.
Where does this go from here?
If this pace continues, and I think it will, you're looking at a full resumption of hostilities within days, not weeks. The ceasefire is effectively dead.
Marcus, thank you. Moving to Europe now, and a major shift could be coming to America's military footprint on the continent. President Trump is open to pulling troops out of Germany and sending them east to Poland. Germany's defense minister is heading to Washington this week to salvage ties with the Trump administration, and she's bringing a bold shopping list. Our technology correspondent Alex Park has been tracking the diplomatic fallout. Alex, what's driving this?
Yeah, Emma. And it's not just about troop movements. What we're seeing here is a fundamental realignment of how Trump views Europe's security architecture. Germany's Chancellor Merz had a pretty public disagreement with the president, and Trump responded by signaling he'd rather strengthen ties with Poland, which has been begging for deeper US military commitment along the Russian border. I was speaking to analysts this morning who say this is Trump sending a message. Invest in your own defense, or we'll redirect our resources to countries that align more closely with our priorities.
So Berlin's now trying to buy its way back into Trump's good graces.
Exactly. The defense minister's Washington trip isn't a courtesy call. It's damage control. Germany wants to acquire Tomahawk cruise missiles independently, which is a significant move. It signals Berlin's willing to spend and build military capability on its own terms. But here's what's striking. They're doing this because they feel the US commitment to the Western alliance is suddenly conditional. And frankly, Emma, that's a watershed moment for NATO.
Alex, appreciate the insight. Tonight, a major evacuation underway off Spain's coast, a cruise ship dealing with a deadly hantavirus outbreak. More than 100 people on board the MV Hondias, 3 already dead and several infected. Spanish authorities have already begun getting passengers off the ship in Tenerife. Alex, what are we learning about how this outbreak happened and how serious the risk actually is?
Yeah, Emma. So what's critical here is the timeline. 5 passengers who left the ship before it arrived in port tested positive for hantavirus. That means they were on the vessel while infected, possibly spreading it to crew and other passengers. But here's what Spanish authorities and the WHO are stressing, and I was looking at their statements this morning. Everyone currently on the ship is showing no symptoms. That's actually significant. They're saying hantavirus, frankly, is far less transmissible than COVID-19 was.
So if people are already infected, why no symptoms showing up yet on the ship itself?
Well, incubation periods vary. We could see cases emerge in the coming days as people are screened and monitored in quarantine facilities. The real story here isn't panic. It's whether the evacuation protocols hold up. Spanish officials are confident they've got the containment measures in place, but this ship had multiple nationalities on board, which means cases are now scattered across different countries. That's the coordination challenge authorities are facing right now.
Alex, thank you. The U.S. just hit 2 Iranian oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Fighter jets took them out Friday, precision strikes into the smokestacks, while the Trump administration is simultaneously telling Tehran there's still time to make a deal. It's a high-stakes gamble, maximum military pressure, and peace talks running on parallel tracks. The question now is whether Iran sees that as negotiating leverage or a reason to walk away. NVIDIA just crossed $40 billion in AI investments this year. That's not just money flowing out, it's the company placing bets on the entire infrastructure stack while also selling chips to the same companies it's funding. Here's what matters. When your supplier is also your investor, who really controls the terms? And tonight, separate investigations are underway into $7 billion in suspicious oil trades placed right before tensions escalated in the Persian Gulf. Both stories raise the same question: who knew what, and when did they know it? The war in Ukraine has a ceasefire tonight, but only for 3 days. President Trump announced the halt in fighting just as Russia marks Victory Day, and it includes prisoner exchanges. But here's what's significant. While negotiators talk peace, Ukraine says it just hit 2 major Russian oil refineries and a pumping station. So even in these rare moments of quiet, both sides are still fighting for advantage. The question now is whether this 3-day pause becomes something longer, or whether we're just watching countries catch their breath before the next wave. Syria's interim government is reshuffling its cabinet tonight in response to public anger over poor performance. President Ahmed al-Sharaa is making personnel changes aimed at delivering faster reforms and better basic services. The move comes just weeks after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, and it's a test of whether the new leadership can actually govern. Meanwhile, in the Persian Gulf, Qatar has just sent its first LNG shipment through the Strait of Hormuz since regional tensions escalated, signaling that critical energy exports are still moving despite security risks.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
Three people are dead, 5 are infected, and over 140 passengers have been quarantined aboard a cruise ship that visited the bottom of the world before docking in the Canary Islands. All because of a virus that scientists have known about for 70 years and still have no vaccine or treatment for. The MV Hondius is now in Tenerife, evacuations are underway, and health authorities are busy telling us this isn't another COVID, which raises the obvious question. If it's so well understood, why are people dying, and why are we still flying blind? Joining me now are Alex Park, our technology and science analyst, and Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst. Alex, let me start with you. Is this a genuine public health emergency, or are institutions managing the optics better than they're managing the actual threat?
Thanks, Emma. Let's be direct about what's happening here. This isn't a mystery pathogen. This isn't disease X emerging from some unknown reservoir. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has been formally documented since 1993. It's been killing people in Argentina, Chile, and the American Southwest for decades. And the CDC puts the fatality rate at nearly 40% in confirmed cases. Nearly 4 in 10 people who get this die. And we have nothing. No vaccine, no antiviral, no targeted treatment. The Telegraph asked the exact right question when it ran with blindsided as its headline. How are we still blindsided by this? The answer points directly at institutional failure, at the WHO, at national health agencies, at a research and development pipeline that has been chronically underinvested in known pathogens because there's no political glamour in solving a problem before it explodes. Tedros and the WHO spent years building political capital on COVID response and equity narratives, and the boring, unglamorous work of building countermeasures for known lethal viruses simply didn't make the priority list. Patient Zero visited a rat-infested landfill in Ushuaia, Argentina, a city that sends hundreds of expedition cruise ships to Antarctica every season, and somehow nobody had formally risk-assessed that exposure pathway. That's not bad luck. That's a system failure.
But Alex, isn't there an argument that you're being unfair here? The WHO and Spanish authorities have actually moved fairly quickly on this. Evacuations are happening, protocols are in place, nobody currently on board is symptomatic. Doesn't that suggest the system is actually working? And Marcus, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Alex is right on the research deficit, but he's conflating two separate problems, and it's muddying the analysis. The evacuation response in Tenerife has been genuinely competent. Spain has handled the logistics well, the quarantine protocols appear sound, and the fact that there are no new symptomatic cases on board is meaningful data, not spin. The institutional problem Alex is identifying is real, but it's a long-term structural failure. It's not what caused this specific outbreak. What caused this outbreak is that a Dutch tourist visited a landfill in one of the most remote port cities on Earth, and the cruise industry has absolutely no standardized pre-excursion health risk protocols for expedition-class tourism. That's actually a free market accountability issue. Ocean-wide expeditions should be required to demonstrate that it assessed rodent-borne disease exposure pathways for shore excursions in known hantavirus endemic regions. And right now, nobody is asking that question. The media is focused on the WHO's reassurances, governments are focused on repatriation logistics, and the cruise industry is quietly hoping the story fades. The data on this is stark. Argentina has reported over 1,000 confirmed hantavirus cases since tracking began. Ushuaia sits in a region with documented Andes virus rodent reservoirs, and this was a calculable, foreseeable risk exposure.
I hear what Marcus is saying, but the cruise industry accountability point, while valid, completely misses the scale of the problem. Look, individual corporate liability frameworks are not going to develop a hantavirus vaccine. Markets solve a lot of things. They don't solve the fundamental public goods problem in infectious disease preparedness because there's no commercial return on developing a vaccine for a pathogen that kills hundreds, not millions, in any given year, until it suddenly does kill millions. And here's what concerns me most about the Andes virus specifically. Unlike most hantavirus strains, it has documented person-to-person transmission. That is not in most of the official statements circulating right now. The WHO is pushing the not like COVID line precisely because COVID spread person-to-person explosively. But if we're dealing with the Andes strain, and given the geographic origin in southern Argentina, that is the most likely candidate. We are talking about a virus that can, under certain conditions, jump from person to person. That changes the risk calculus entirely. And the people on those repatriation flights back to Madrid deserve to know that.
Here's what I want to know, because the repatriation flights are already in the air. People are dispersing internationally right now, and the incubation period for hantavirus can be up to 6 weeks. Marcus, where do you see this going in terms of whether containment actually holds?
The way I see this playing out, the most probable near-term outcome is genuine containment. No new symptomatic cases on the ship is genuinely encouraging data, and the quarantine timeline for most passengers should capture any secondary infections before they become community transmission events. But I want to be honest about the risk here. If any passenger who disembarked before the formal quarantine, like the British guide Martin Anstey, who was evacuated even earlier, had close contact exposure with family or friends before symptoms became apparent, you could see small secondary clusters in the UK, Netherlands, or wherever passengers originated from. Health authorities need to be aggressively contact tracing the pre-quarantine evacuation cases, not just the shipboard population. The question becomes whether national health services, particularly the NHS, which is already under enormous pressure, have the bandwidth to run thorough 6-week surveillance protocols on dozens of international travelers simultaneously.
Here's what concerns me most. It's not this outbreak specifically, it's the institutional response pattern it's revealing. We're watching health authorities deploy the same playbook we saw in early COVID. Don't panic. It's not as bad as you think. We have protocols in place. That playbook failed catastrophically in 2020 because by the time the reassurances stopped, containment was impossible. If the Andes strain does demonstrate person-to-person spread in any of the repatriated cases, the credibility cost of having front-loaded all the "this isn't COVID" messaging will be enormous. And the research gap doesn't close itself. 70 years of knowing this virus exists, 30 years of tracking its lethal American variants, and the pipeline for countermeasures is still essentially empty. That's not a market failure. That's a political and institutional priority failure, and specific people at the WHO and in national health agencies need to be held accountable for it.
Gentlemen, compelling and frankly unsettling analysis from both of you tonight. Alex Park, Marcus Webb, thank you. One thing's for certain, somewhere in Ushuaia, the rats aren't reading the WHO's reassurance briefing, and neither should we. Vladimir Putin used Victory Day, Russia's most sacred national holiday, to declare the Ukraine war is coming to an end, standing before a scaled-back Red Square parade that, notably, included no heavy weapons for the first time in nearly 20 years. A U.S.-brokered ceasefire collapsed on its very first day amid mutual accusations of violations, and Ukrainian forces have reportedly made battlefield gains that directly contradict Putin's triumphant framing. So what is actually happening here? Is Putin genuinely signaling an endgame? Or is this the most carefully staged piece of geopolitical theater since the Cold War? Joining me now are Elena Vasquez, our Europe and EU analyst, and Alex Park, our technology and science analyst. Elena, let me start with you. Is Putin speaking from a position of strength, or is this the language of a man trying to manufacture a victory he hasn't actually achieved?
Thanks, Emma. Let me be direct. This is a Victory Day performance, not a peace overture. And anyone in Brussels or Washington treating it as the latter is making a catastrophically naive mistake. Putin stood on Red Square, the most symbolically loaded stage in Russian political culture, accused Western globalist elites of trying to break up Russia, and then calmly declared the matter coming to an end. That is not the language of a man seeking compromise. That is the language of a man telling you he's already decided how this story ends, and he's decided he wins. Douglas Murray has been saying for 2 years that the West's problem isn't weapons, it's strategic clarity, and he's absolutely right. The absence of heavy weapons from that parade isn't restraint. Those assets are deployed in Ukraine right now. And here's what should terrify every NATO government. A ceasefire that collapses on day one isn't a failed peace process. It's a successful Russian information operation that makes Kyiv look intransigent.
But, Elena, devil's advocate here, Putin's forces have suffered catastrophic losses, estimated at somewhere between 700,000 and 900,000 killed or wounded. His parade was scaled back. The ceasefire, however imperfect, exists because the U.S. pushed for it. Doesn't that suggest the pressure is working and that maybe this is closer to an endgame than you're giving credit for? And Alex, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Elena's read on Putin's intentions is probably right, but I think she's missing the more uncomfortable data point here, which is what those losses mean for Western strategy going forward. Russia has absorbed casualties that would collapse any democratic government and kept fighting because Putin doesn't have to face voters. His defense budget is now consuming roughly 40% of federal spending. That's a war economy operating at full mobilization. But here's the thing, Emma. Ukraine has received over $100 billion in Western assistance, and its economy has still contracted by around 30% since 2022. The question I keep asking is, at what point does the Western public, who do vote, decide the cost-benefit calculation no longer works? Polling across Germany, France, and Italy already shows softening support. That's not defeatism. That's democracy operating as designed. And you can't wish it away.
I hear what Alex is saying, but with respect, that analysis plays directly into Putin's hands. The entire Russian strategy, and I mean this precisely, is to wait out Western democratic fatigue. That's not a new strategy, it's the strategy. And yes, the public in Germany and France is tired, but you know what they'll be more tired of? Watching Russia march through a second country after we let him freeze this conflict at terms he dictated. Look, Zelensky is making battlefield gains right now, even as Putin declares victory. Short, punchy fact, the man claiming the war is over is simultaneously losing ground. The West needs to decide if it believes in national sovereignty or not, because Putin is betting everything that we don't.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that keeps me up at night. National Review is arguing that Orban's political exit from Hungary is an opening for renewed aid to Ukraine. And the American Conservative is warning that Zelensky's biggest threat might actually be internal. So where does this actually go from here? If the ceasefire is already dead and battlefield momentum is shifting, what are the realistic outcomes over the next 6 to 12 months? Alex, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are really two credible paths. Either the West gets serious, and I mean genuinely serious, with long-range strike authorization, accelerated European defense commitments, and political will that survives the next election cycle, or this conflict freezes along current territorial lines. Russia declares a win, and the precedent that gets set is read very carefully in Beijing. The Orban shift matters because it removes one veto point in European decision-making. But the Trump administration still has to decide whether Ukraine is a strategic priority or a legacy issue from the previous administration. That decision, made or unmade in the next 90 days, probably determines the trajectory more than anything happening on the battlefield right now.
Here's what concerns me most, and I don't think this gets enough attention. It's the third scenario nobody wants to say out loud. A Putin who faces genuine military reversal, not just tactical setbacks, has historically escalated his rhetoric to nuclear language every single time. Whether that ever becomes action is the great uncertainty. But the risk here is that Western governments, spooked by that rhetoric, pull back precisely at the moment Ukrainian momentum could be decisive. That's the trap. That's always been the trap. And if we fall into it again, history will not be kind to the leaders who had the chance to end this on terms favorable to free nations and chose instead to manage their own political comfort.
Elena Vasquez, Alex Park, genuinely one of the most important conversations we've had on this program. One thing is certain, Putin is betting the entire Russian state on the West blinking first, and somewhere in a European foreign ministry tonight, a very nervous official is hoping he's wrong.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.